Video game sequels have an interesting dimension to them that other types of entertainment sequels like movies or books don't: their interactivity and gameplay. A book will only have the quality of its writing to maintain or improve for the sequel, as well as continuing the story in a satisfying way. A movie also has the writing and story to consider, but also deals with the cinematography, the stunts, the special effects, the acting, and so on. A video game combines all of these elements and adds on the gameplay. All this to say that making a video game sequel can be a lot of fucking work, when you have to iterate and improve on so many different elements of aspects of storytelling while also figuring out ways to make the gameplay better. There are certain games whose sequels can redefine the series, whose leap in quality is so noticeable and obvious that it can be hard to go back to the previous games once they're released. Assassin's Creed to Assassin's Creed 2, Uncharted Drake's Fortune to Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, and Mass Effect to Mass Effect 2. I gotta admit, whenever I replayed the Mass Effect games in the past, I sometimes skipped replaying Mass Effect 1 entirely and started with Mass Effect 2. Not because I thought ME1 was a bad game or anything, but I just loved ME2 so much that I wanted to play it again right away. And while I still think that Mass Effect 2 is an excellent game, nothing is perfect, and this game is no exception. I played the Legendary Edition of Mass Effect 2 for 2 playthroughs, a Paragon playthrough on normal difficulty and a Renegade playthrough on easy difficulty at first, but switched back to normal eventually. There will be some spoilers for some characters and plot points, but I'm not going to spoil huge chunks of the game. You have been warned. Right off the bat, you can tell that this isn't exactly the same old Mass Effect from the first game. Everything is simultaneously darker with much more dramatic lighting and shadows that seem to spill out from every corner, and more colorful with bright neon lights and deep reds and blues that pop out and feel vibrant and alive. Mass Effect 2's world feels more dangerous, and even without the knowledge that the story provides that it is in fact more dangerous, just looking at screenshots of Omega can tell you all you need to know about it. A lot of ME1 could feel really samey and copy-pasted, and while ME2 definitely does copy-paste, it's either to a much lesser degree or it's just hidden a lot better. I rarely felt like I was seeing the same old thing while exploring the different locations in the game. In fact, the breadth of visual variety in the locations is incredibly impressive. Even the most underdeveloped side mission still has a unique location to visit. It isn't just the environments that got a glow up either. The character models are much more detailed as well. The Legendary Edition of course adds better textures and lighting, but the art direction and aesthetic of the game are what really makes it look fantastic. There was a real concerted effort here to increase the cinematic presentation in cutscenes and conversations. The camera work and animations are the standout here. Where in the original game most conversations would have a back and forth between two characters of either a headshot or upper torso, standing relatively still with minimal movement, now there's camera pans and zooms and characters will walk around and emote more. It might seem like a small change, but it really goes a long way to making conversations feel more real and less gamey. There's still plenty of the old standard cutting back and forth like in the first game, but it's offset by how many conversations are more dynamically presented. Audio-wise, the game is similarly upgraded from the first. The soundscape is fuller, most of the time, especially during combat. The yells from your adversaries as they crumple to the ground, the callouts from your squad when they unleash their abilities, the sounds of said abilities, your guns firing, the music swelling. It's a lot to take in and makes combat encounters feel intense from the audio alone. The voice acting is fantastic, with a lot less reusing of actors for multiple characters than the first game. There still are some, but it feels more tongue-in-cheek this time rather than due to budgetary constraints, like how Mark Meer, the voice of Male Shepherd, also voices this drugged-up Volus. It's pretty funny. ME1's score was great, but ME2 takes it up to another level. Jack Wall returns to lead the songwriting team, and there are so many standout tracks here it's insane. Continuing the blend of synths, electronic, and orchestration, as well as including plenty of tense and atmospheric pieces, the score feels like a cohesive evolution of what came before. Some of my favorites include Elusive Man, Suicide Mission, The Normandy Room, New Worlds, and Reflections. There are some technical issues to speak of, like how the Legendary Edition launcher can be pretty finicky, causing an infinite loading loop occasionally when I try to launch Mass Effect 2, or just crashing outright a couple times. There was one time where the audio just cut out completely for a few lines of dialogue, and sentences being cut off before the speaker can finish without the player inputting anything to speed up the conversation was a relatively frequent occurrence as well. Kasumi's loyalty mission bugged the fuck out on my second playthrough, screwing up a bunch of textures including her clothes. There are a few other odd things to mention. Animations still look a bit wonky every once in a while. There are plenty of instances where Shepard and the crew are just casually walking around during in-game cutscenes without so much as their guns drawn in pretty dangerous situations. It's a little goofy. For some reason, the journal is no longer mapped to the J key like it was in the first game, and you cannot toggle your helmet anymore, meaning if you don't want your helmet to appear in gameplay or cutscenes, you have to not wear one, even though helmets do give bonus stats. That one is a pretty strange decision, seeing how you could toggle helmets in the first game. After stopping Saren and Sovereign from destroying the Citadel, Commander Shepard was sent on a mission to wipe out any remaining Geth resistance. During this mission, a massive and mysterious ship attacks the Normandy, destroying it and killing Shepard in the process. Shepard is brought back to life 2 years later by Cerberus, a pro-human quasi-terrorist group led by the Elusive Man. The Elusive Man offers Shepard a new mission. Humans are disappearing from far-out colonies in the tens of thousands, possibly by the same group that killed Shepard, an alien species known as the Collectors, who are suspected to be working for the Reapers. Shepard agrees to the mission and sets out to gather a group of companions fit for the mission and bring down the Collectors. Mass Effect 2's story is darker and grittier than the first game. It's more violent and brutal, and the subject matter does go some dark places. The galaxy isn't a nice place for a lot of people, and that's reflected in the characters as well. The first game had 6 companions, and the second has 12. Well, technically 13 depending on a choice you can make in Samara's loyalty mission. The actual main story of ME2 can be completed rather quickly in just a few hours, if you really wanted to skip most of the game's content. But I would say that doing so would be a waste of an amazing game. Most of the content in ME2 actually revolves around your companions. Most of them need to be recruited via a recruitment mission, and then every companion also has a loyalty mission you can do that unlocks a new skin for them, their final squad ability, and gives them a better chance of surviving the final mission of the game. I'll give a brief overview of each companion like I did in my review of the first game. Jacob was an Alliance soldier that got disillusioned with the way the Alliance worked and ended up joining with Cerberus. And that's about it. Most people, myself included, would probably say that their least favorite companion is Jacob. The main reason for that, excluding anything that may or may not happen in Mass Effect 3, is because he's just kind of boring. He does have one of the better loyalty missions in the game, but aside from his daddy issues, there really isn't much to talk about with him. Miranda is the second Cerberus operative in your squad, and is more interesting than Jacob, but still not one of my favorites. She begins the game as an incredibly abrasive and cold character, but seems to flip to being much more cordial and even friendly pretty quickly. It's not that she doesn't have a character arc, it just feels like it kind of skips a few steps. She too has daddy issues, which is a theme for a number of characters in the game. Her loyalty mission is one of the less interesting ones in my opinion. Zaid is an old grizzled mercenary who is one of 2 DLC companions for the game. Every companion that launched with the game has full dialogue wheel conversations that progress after most missions, but the DLC characters only have a dialogue prompt with a couple sentences that do progress somewhat throughout the game. They are full companions, however, and can be taken on basically every mission once they're recruited. Zaid's loyalty mission has some good decision making involved, and the reveal of how Zaid is connected to the Blue Suns, one of 3 main mercenary groups in Mass Effect 2, adds more weight to his character. Kasumi is a master thief and the second DLC companion. She's likable enough, I suppose, but beyond her loyalty mission, which is actually quite unique for the game, being a sort of heist operation, there isn't much to her character besides her dead love interest. Samara is an Asari Justicar, a sort of honorable warrior / executioner that follows a rigid code and kills evildoers with extreme prejudice. Samara is one of the more unique squad mates with a sort of cold and detached personality with a subtle, dry sense of humor. Her loyalty mission involves hunting down a dangerous fugitive that she's been hunting for decades, and is one of the more standout missions in the game since it doesn't include any combat. Jack comes across like an angsty edgelord at first, and well, she kind of is, but after hearing her backstory, you come to realize why she acts the way she does. She was the product of a rogue Cerberus experiment similar to many of the ones you came across in Mass Effect 1, and it's actually one of the darkest parts of ME2's story. Jack's loyalty mission is good, but I feel like it didn't really need to have combat. Thane is a Drell assassin with a terminal illness trying to do some good before he dies to try and make up for all the bad he might have done. Thane Thane's story also deals with daddy issues, only this time he's the daddy. Wow, what a twist. Thane's loyalty mission is another more unique one involving an interrogation and tailing mission. The hell is this? Am I playing Assassin's Creed again? Legion is the most surprising addition to the companions, being a Geth and all. He doesn't show up until near the end of the main story, so I never really get to have him as a squad mate much, cause I'm one of those people that always does most, if not every side quest before finishing the game. Still, Legion adds a great dynamic to the story, shedding some light on the Geth and introducing a new layer to the synthetics versus organics theme present in all three games. Grunt is the new Krogan on the block, and boy does he make an entrance. Grunt is tank-born, meaning he was created in a lab and entered the world as an adult with no real-world experience. It's kind of like dealing with a bloodthirsty giant child that could kill you whenever it wanted to, but still thinks that dinosaurs are cool. Grunt's loyalty mission is pretty good and explores more of Krogan culture. Tali and Garrus return from the first game, and it's great seeing some familiar faces in the squad. Both characters have been developed and fleshed out, particularly Tali. In the first game, Tali was more or less a dispenser for knowledge on Quarians and their culture, but in the second, she actually has a character and personality that stands on its own. I mean, she is still very much tied to her people, which is something that every Quarian seems to share. Her loyalty mission involves, you guessed it, daddy issues, but also gives us a large glimpse into how Quarians live and how their society functions. In the interim between the first and second game, Garrus began listening to emo music and became Turian Batman, except he kills people. Garrus has more personality this time around, but his character does seem to repeat the same story he had in the first game somewhat. His loyalty mission consists of tracking down and killing someone who wronged him, which is very similar to his mission in the first game. The characters are what really makes ME2 work, because while the main story is good, I actually think that the first game's story is better. There was a lot more to uncover and figure out about the Reapers and Protheans. There was more mystery and twists. And while ME2 does have some good moments, I can't help but feel like overall, going after the collectors kind of feels like a really long filler episode. Like the first game is about discovering that the Reapers exist and are intent on ending all sapient life in the galaxy. The third game is about going to war with the Reapers, and the second game is kind of like a stopgap where nothing that interesting actually happens to move the plot forward. Don't get me wrong though, Mass Effect 2 absolutely matters in the overall story because so much of what happens in ME3 and the characters that are present in that game are set up in ME2. The dialogue system that Mass Effect pioneered has received a new addition with interrupts. Sometimes during conversations, a Renegade or Paragon interrupt prompt will show up, and pressing the corresponding button will cause a new scene to play depending on which alignment the prompt was for. A Paragon interrupt might result in Shepard comforting someone or trying to convince someone to do the right thing, while a Renegade interrupt can result in Shepard being physically aggressive, intimidating, or even outright killing someone. These are basically quick time events though, so you need to be on your toes during conversations if you want to use them. I think interrupts add a cool dynamic to conversations that breaks up the regular RPG formula a bit. Speaking of RPG, Mass Effect 2 has, let's say, streamlined the action RPG experience from ME1 in both good and bad ways. A lot of these changes are centered around the gameplay, which I'll talk about in a bit, but some of these changes affect the story as well. The speech skills of Charm and Intimidate from the first game have been removed in favor of the player accumulating Paragon and Renegade points by choosing the corresponding dialogue options while playing. This further encourages players to be either Paragon or Renegade instead of choosing which dialogue option seems most appropriate to them at the time. Something I've noticed after playing through both games is that I don't think there's a single instance in either game where you can pass a speech check specifically for Renegade or Paragon without having the opposite speech check available as well. What I mean by this is that in every instance where you have the opportunity to use a speech check, such as when you try to get Rex to stand down on Vermeer, or when you try to stop Jack and Miranda from fighting, you always have either a Renegade or Paragon option, never just one option, at least not that I can remember. This sort of devalues the morality system in the game because whatever options you choose, it will still work out in basically the same way most of the time. Whether you use the Paragon or Renegade option to defuse the situation with Rex, the outcome remains the same as it does with the Jack and Miranda confrontation. Interrupts are likewise never locked out depending on your Renegade or Paragon score. before. Even if you play the most paragon of all paragons, you can still do every single renegade interrupt in the whole game. Most RPGs have a single speech or charisma skill that you can put points into in order to pass speech checks for said skill, and a few other bonuses, as well as having speech checks for other skills like hacking, for example. Mass Effect has none of this, and while I don't think every RPG needs to have every mechanic that every other RPG has, I do think that comparing systems and seeing what the pros and cons of each system are is a fair thing to do. If Mass Effect 2 was aiming to be a deep RPG experience, I don't think that the Renegade and Paragon system as it functions in the game lends itself very well to achieving that goal. However, I don't really think that that was the goal for Mass Effect 2. It seems to me that ME2 was more focused on streamlining and quote-unquote dumbing down the RPG systems of Mass Effect 1 while improving the combat in order to appeal to a more general audience. And I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I still love the game even if the RPG systems both gameplay and story-wise are a little disappointing. I just wish that the morality system had more consequence from conversation to conversation, rather than most of the time feeling like you can only choose which flavor of response you give that doesn't actually have much impact on conversations or the story. Combat has gotten a major overhaul in ME2. The combat in ME1 was a pretty janky experience with some floaty and unresponsive controls and powers, as well as a cover system that didn't work super well. ME2 takes all of that jank and throws it out the window. The cover system actually works pretty well now and is a more integral part of the experience than before. The combat feels faster and more intense, and the controls are responsive and tight. Same for the powers and abilities. In ME1 there was a noticeable delay whenever you used one of your powers, and the end result felt kind of flat. But in ME2, whenever you use an ability, most of the time, it happens instantaneously, giving you immediate feedback with a flashy visual and sound effect, making the abilities feel powerful and satisfying to use. ME2 slightly changes the way that weapons work by removing the overheating and cooldown mechanic from the first game in favor of a more standard ammo and reloading system that most shooters use. I personally like the ammo system more, as ammo is now a resource that the player has to be mindful of, even if running out of ammo is a pretty rare occasion. The tactical menu has been changed. Instead of spreading it out across the screen, everything is now at the bottom. I didn't like this change at first, but it grew on me as the game went on. Mass Effect 2 uses a global cooldown now for your powers as opposed to individual cooldowns like in the first game. This encourages more considered usage of your abilities. You still can't cancel using a power if you click on the wrong one, which can be a little frustrating, and you can't cancel switching a weapon either, which seem like obvious oversights. But you can cancel switching weapons and power usage for your squad mates. Your powers and abilities have been streamlined down to 4 per squad mate and 6 for Shepard, which changes based on what class you take, as well as a bonus power. The bonus power allows you to take a unique power from one of your companions after you've completed their loyalty mission. For comparison, Shepard had 11 skills in the first game and your companions had 9. As mentioned earlier, the speech skills Charm and Intimidate have been removed in favor of ME2's new way of accumulating Renegade and Paragon points. The other skills have been removed because their accompanying systems have also been removed or disconnected from them. While there is still hacking in ME2, it is no longer tied to a skill, so you can hack any door or any system at any time. ME2 also removes the entire inventory system, so having skills associated with armor no longer matters. Weapon skills have been removed as well, as shooting is much more tuned like an action game and less like an RPG, meaning that all the guns are pretty powerful and accurate regardless of which class you have. Replacing the gun skills are ammo skills like incendiary ammo that lights enemies on fire, or cryo ammo which freezes enemies in place. I can understand why they removed all the skills that they did, and I actually do think it improved the gameplay a lot. However, going from 9 skills per companion down to 4 is a pretty big change, and I do wish that BioWare had made more new skills to replace the skills that had been cut, which would have allowed for more diverse builds across your companions. As it exists in-game, basically every playthrough will be pretty much the same in terms of build variety because of how limited the skill choices are. When you max out a skill, you do have the opportunity to choose between 2 specialization options. I guess it's better than nothing. Don't get me wrong though, the skills and powers that you do have make an impact for the most part, especially the Vanguard's charge skill, which may be one of the coolest powers in any game ever. Maybe saying that the inventory system has been removed from the game wasn't 100% correct. You can still choose your loadout between missions of which guns you want to use, and you can still change your armor, which do have different stats. For some reason, you can't actually view your gun's stats, so you have to go off some text to try and figure out which guns are better than others. A lot of the inventory system has been cut though, like mods for your guns, grenades, and biotic amps, of which the latter two are entirely absent from the game. Probably the biggest change to ME2 though is the removal of the Mako. No longer will you go planet to planet, drop in, and start driving around in your floaty mechanical vehicle. Now planet exploration is limited to scanning planets for minerals, which allow you to research new upgrades. Cutting the Mako and planet exploration really does change the feel of the game a lot, and I'm kind of conflicted about it. The Mako sections of the game were definitely repetitive and boring, but I never felt like I wanted the entire mechanic to be removed from the game. I just wanted it to be improved. But I can't deny that I still thoroughly enjoyed the game we got anyways. Mass Effect 2 had a lot of DLC, most of it being different weapons and armors, which I'm not gonna bother getting into. The more substantial DLC include Lair of the Shadow Broker, Overlord, Arrival, Firewalker, and the aforementioned DLC companions Zaid and Kasumi. The Firewalker pack includes 5 missions with the new Hammerhead vehicle, which is a lot more maneuverable than the Mako ever was. This DLC pack is honestly pretty boring and repetitive, and mostly consists of driving around big levels and shooting Geth. The Overlord DLC involves going to a Cerberus research facility where experimentation with Geth has gone wrong. It has some cool moments, but is ultimately more or less just another bunch of missions where you fight Geth. Arrival bridges the gap between the end of ME2 and the beginning of ME3. Shepard is asked to investigate the disappearance of an Alliance scientist who is reportedly working on something involving the Reapers. If you don't play the Arrival DLC, the beginning of ME3 won't make any sense to you, so it's basically required playing. I do think Arrival is a little more unique than other missions in the game, beginning with an infiltration and rescue mission, as well as the stakes being really high. But my favorite DLC is the Lair of the Shadow Broker. Liara is trying to track down the Shadow Broker in order to save a friend, and it results in a really cool sequence of missions with some serious story ramifications for the Mass Effect universe. The Legendary Edition comes with all the DLC for Mass Effect 2, and while I don't think all of it is fantastic, and there's probably a little too much content that was relegated to DLC when the game first released, I would recommend playing through it all. Mass Effect 2 took the foundation laid by Mass Effect 1 and ruthlessly removed anything that bogged down the experience, while refining and improving everything it kept for the most part. The stripped down RPG systems are a little disappointing, but ME2 was clearly aiming for a more cinematic action experience than a more traditional RPG one, and it's pretty successful at what it was trying to do. ME2 is most people's favorite game in the franchise, and while I definitely prefer it over the first game and Andromeda, I haven't finished replaying ME3 yet, so I'll get back to you on that. Regardless, Mass Effect 2 is a fantastic game with excellent combat, a strong and distinct visual style, an amazing musical score, and an extremely memorable cast of characters that makes this experience worth playing and remembering. I'm going to give Mass Effect 2 a 9 out of 10. I'm very curious to hear your opinions on the video and on Mass Effect 2. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and commenting your thoughts on the game. Thanks for watching.